Welcome to the S.O.A.P video series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We are starting a brand new series, or working our way through a brand new book, the Gospel of Mark.
Woo!
Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of cool. I would say from the standpoint of Gospels, I've been in Mark the least, at least early on.
Good.
But for whatever reason, the last couple of years, it seems like Mark just keeps coming up and up. I think you did a series on it not too long ago. Well, it's probably been many years now, but you know, really going through it, and it just seems to, for whatever reason, kind of keep coming up. So, nice book, you know. Obviously, yeah. Me judging the Gospels there. So we need to talk.
It's
Yeah,
nice,
it's
you know.
nice. It's nice. But from a background point of view, written by a man by the name of John Mark.
Mm-hmm.
He was not an original apostle,
Right.
Not an eyewitness to some of the events.
Yeah, some of them he was there.
Yeah.
It seems like his family's in Jerusalem.
Right.
So it's sort of like almost like a hanger-on.
Yeah.
You know, third wheel type is sort of the impression that I get.
And I would even say he kind of starts showing up towards the end of the Gospels, too. Yeah. We see him showing up 3 or 4 times specifically by name in there. At one point in time, Peter is under arrest, and an angel comes and releases him. And where does he go? He goes to John Mark's mother's house.
Yeah. Yeah,
so there was some kind of...
in the early church, it seems like maybe his family was
they seemed well-to-do, and maybe had a church at their house or a meeting place at their house.
Yeah. Why would Peter, when he was released in Acts 12, he knew that they would be gathered there.
Yeah. Well, it's Tuesday night, so everybody's there for a prayer meeting.
He seems to be Barnabas, related to Barnabas somehow, right?
Yeah, nephew or a cousin.
Yeah,
or
some translations say different words, but somehow related to Barnabas.
Right. So he and Paul. So Barnabas and Paul decided that they were going to go on a mission trip together, and they took John Mark with them. Right. Which is great. And then there was problems.
Yeah, about halfway through, John is like, Mark, this is not what I signed up for.
Yeah.
And he hightailed it back to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And they continued their
and that caused a big rift. Yeah. Right? And I think that it actually, between Barnabas and Paul, caused a rift, too. Yeah. And they kind of went their separate ways.
Yeah, second time around, they wanted to go out together, and Barnabas is like, you know what? We're going to give John Mark a second chance. Paul said, over my dead body.
Yeah. Right.
So Barnabas did take Mark.
Yeah.
Paul found Silas, and they ended up doubling their ministry capacity by going in 2 different directions.
Right. And then later on in life, it seems that John Mark ended up in Rome with Peter and became really a protege of Peter. Yeah. But even before that, he also helped out Paul when Paul was in Rome too, and proved to be useful. I think was his words. Right?
I love that in 2 Timothy, Paul says that John Mark has become useful to me. Yeah. So, I don't know, if that's sort of like a, where on the ranking that shows up. He proved to be useful. Didn't say he was my best friend or anything.
Right.
So church tradition, we're not going to find this anywhere in Scripture, but early church history, church tradition says that John Mark became Peter's disciple and was following him around, was working with him, learning from him. And Peter was just preaching. Peter was, speaking, telling stories, regaling the people with, stories of Jesus, that sort of thing. And they wanted it written down. They wanted to be able to have these things over and over. And so church tradition says that Mark ended up writing down basically Peter's recollection.
Right.
So in a sense, if that's true, we don't know for sure, I guess. But if that's true, then the gospel that is called the Gospel of Mark is actually the Gospel of Peter according to Mark, in a sense, right? Whereas the letters from Peter were actually written from Peter, sort of dictated by Peter. Right. This is sort of a step back.
Right. Well, it's also somewhat understood that if he's taking it from Peter's preaching later in life, also, some things maybe are a little bit out of order.
Yeah.
Right. So we do see some things that don't seem to be chronologically in order.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times it gets a pass in Mark because it wasn't important.
Yeah. One of the
order wasn't necessarily.
Yeah, not like Luke, where Luke said, "I'm
boom,
trying to do
right.
this," right? One of the interesting things about Mark is that, like you said, in Rome, with Paul, Peter, whatever, he seems to be writing to a Gentile audience, a
right.
Roman or a Greco-Roman audience, because as we read through this, there are several times where it says, where he makes a reference to a word or to a location or something in
right.
Israel, and he's like, "Oh, that means."
Yeah, then he
explains
the Jewish terms.
Yeah, he explains the a Passover. Well, okay, so this is why Passover is important. That type of thing, and so he's expecting his people to not, or his readers to not necesserly understand all of that,
right?
Which is cool because.
Yeah, right. It gives us more information. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I also see where, when you read it, there's a lot of action.
Tons.
I mean, things happen quick.
Yeah.
Immediately, Jesus went.
Yep.
Then they all left. Then this happened. And it's always boom, boom, boom,
Yeah.
with the action. Not a ton of description. I mean, some description.
Yeah.
But he moves very quickly, and there's no background of Jesus either.
Right.
It just jumps right in to the story. And I think it was your commentary. I'll give you credit for it because most of the time I don't give you credit for it in the commentary. You brought out that this was a servant story where Jesus is portrayed as a servant.
Yeah.
And if you think about it from that standpoint, nobody cares the background of a servant, where a servant came from. Okay, we do, obviously, but if it was written to Rome, where there were slaves all over the place
right.
who would have been servants, they didn't care where the servants came from. It's go do your master's work type of thing.
Yeah, and that's a very traditional understanding. Each of the four Gospels presents Jesus in a different way,
right?
And the servanthood of Jesus here in Mark. There are some estimates that the Roman Empire, so not just Rome the city, but the empire, or let's say the population, was upwards to maybe 2/3 of the population was slaves.
Oh, 2/3.
Yeah, and servants. Yeah. Citizenship was really a premium. The being free. Just because you were free doesn't mean you were a citizen. So you got citizenship was small. Free was a little bit bigger, but the vast majority was servants or slaves of some kind, indentured maybe or whatever. So yeah, you start to read this and it feels like you're being pulled through. Yeah. There's no breaks. You don't see a lot of downtime. He's just constantly on the move. You also don't see Mark has less, let's say, teaching than he does doing. Matthew and Luke and John, we've got these long discourses. He's teaching, and we're going to take 2 chapters to do this. Mark doesn't have time for that.
He's busy.
He's really, really busy.
Yeah.
In fact, I counted up. There's 16 chapters. That was the easy part. The 16 chapters. I counted. I went to the back and, hey, look at that. But chapters 11 through 16, so the last 6 chapters, which is 37% of the book, is Passion Week and Death and Resurrection.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not a lot of stuff after the resurrection.
Right.
A little bit in chapter 16, but not a lot. But like more than a third, pushing 40% of the book is about that final week.
Is a week.
So everything else, the first 10 chapters, are really condensed.
Right.
Some of the stories that you know really well, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, I can't wait to read that story again. And it comes out to you like 3 verses. I thought there was more detail.
Right.
I thought that story was longer.
Yeah.
Well, it is probably if you read it in one of the other Gospels.
Right.
Mark?
It gets to it.
Yeah.
So the example is even chapter 1, verse 1.
Yeah.
So Mark jumps right to the end, which I think is kind of cool. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God.
There it is.
there's no mistaking where we're going to this. There's no easing into it. Boom, we're there.
Yep.
Then he jumps back to Isaiah. We get some verses on Isaiah and John the Baptist in there. Jumps into Jesus' baptism and immediately into the temptation.
Yep.
We see the disciples being at Jesus asking the disciples to join them, and that's the first 20 verses.
Yeah. Whereas in Matthew and Luke, that's the first 4 chapters. Right. You know, they're detailing
easing
it out.
into it.
He's just like, you know, the Gospel of John spends a chapter and a half on John the Baptist. Right. Here he spends, 7 verses.
Right.
You know, it's not about...
And even those are out of Isaiah, right? Versus...
A couple of them are, quoting Isaiah and Malachi, right? Yeah.
Right. So there's a number of stories in here. We had a choice to make. Do we pick each story and say a little bit about it? Well, kind of what we decided to do was let's pick some major stories and spend a little more time on those.
Yeah, some bigger things.
Yeah.
You know, the accounts are pretty easy to read. You're going to read through them. You're going to be reminded. But he's already hitting the highlights, so we're doing the highlight reel of the highlights.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we should start in chapter 2. There's a healing and forgiving of a man who's paralyzed in there. And the idea is this man is paralyzed, and where Jesus is at, it seems like it's a madhouse, and they can't get to him. So what they decide to do is take the roof off and lower their friend down.
Yeah.
And ask Jesus to heal him. This happened to be on a Sunday, right?
Well,
maybe I'm mixing my stories together. Or no, Jesus forgave. Sorry. Sunday's the Sabbath. Right? Jesus forgave his sins, and then there's questions on whether his sins made him paralyzed or not.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I don't think. I mean, there's nothing in any of the gospel accounts that I think leads to that. But I think what he was really doing was you've got the experts in the law, you've got the scribes and the Pharisees and these other people. And so Jesus sort of, I get this idea in my mind where Jesus sort of glances their way, gets a little bit of a grin on his face, and says, your sins are forgiven. And they just go ballistic, at least inside, right?
Yeah, they light up, right? Yeah. Well, because that's their job, right? Their job is to weed out false teachers.
Yeah.
And who can forgive sins? Only God
can forgive sins. Right.
And what they don't realize is...
well, that's true, yeah. Yeah. God's right there.
Right.
And he looks at them, and they're just, I mean, you can see the veins in their necks, and they're just like, the smoke coming out of their ears. And he looks at him, he's like, which is easier to say? Your sins are forgiven, or get up and walk? I'm like, you can't prove that I did or didn't forgive his sins. Right. But just so you know, that I do have, and by the way, he uses the term Son of Man. The Son of Man has the authority. That is a term that comes out of Daniel chapter 7. It is a messianic title. He is claiming to be Messiah every time he calls himself Son of Man. Just so that you know that the Son of Man does indeed have the power and the authority to forgive sins. Go ahead and get up and walk.
Yeah, and the guy does, right? But that is the idea, show me a miracle. Here's a miracle.
Yeah.
And then it's, well, this can't be right.
Yeah, right.
Versus everyone else who's accepting it, and everyone else is, hey, this guy is healing, and now there's hundreds, if not thousands, of people there, trying to be healed, and some there for the show too.
Sure, but if you watched that happen, or you heard that happened by somebody that you trusted, right? And you were sick, or you have somebody who's sick, you went over Simon Peter's mother-in-law, right? She's laying there, and, which, by the way, that means he was married.
Yep.
Right? The first pope, right? Wouldn't you drag your mother-in-law or your mother or somebody who was sick, wouldn't you drag them to Jesus and take a number and try to push through?
Yeah, exactly. Because by the time you've gone to doctors and nothing is working, take a shot.
Yeah. I mean, the worst that can happen is nothing.
Right.
you know, and if there's any chance. And so, yeah, he was inundated everywhere he went.
Right.
But he kept using the phrase Son of Man, Son of Man, Son of Man, because he wanted them to know that he's doing these miracles to prove he's their Messiah. And it's not just, don't just believe in the miracle, believe in me. And that was the thing that they could not get past. The miracles they couldn't, I mean, he obviously did them.
Right.
You know, they couldn't dispute those. You know, the man got up and walked.
Yeah. Well, I think even next week it's, well, the only reason you can do them is because you're from Satan.
Yeah, and that's a whole different twist
different
on
story.
things. Yeah, a whole different twist because they knew it wasn't.
Right.
You know, so.
Right. The other one I wanted to hit, at least for today, and we can then hit anyone you want to, is the Lord of the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Also. So the disciples are walking through a field, and it happens to be on a Sabbath. No, I'm doing better. I didn't say Sunday that time. And the disciples pick the heads off the wheat, and they're eating it as they're walking through. And well, first of all, was that considered theft?
No.
And right, so it's not. So it was permitted actually by the Mosaic law.
Right.
The problem was on the Sabbath. And from a Pharisee's point of view and some of the add-ons, that was determined to be work.
So, I mean, back up a little bit, because you said it was permissible under the Mosaic law. Why? I mean, what was the surrounding? What, you could just walk through somebody's field and eat their stuff, or
to a point, right?
Yeah,
definitely the leftovers, right? The farmer was supposed to leave things so people could come in and eat.
Right.
So is that what you think happened?
Yeah, Jesus is itinerant. The disciples are itinerant. And yeah, under the Mosaic law, it specifically said when you're plowing and everything, don't go all the way to the edge. Leave some for the widows, for the orphans, for the itinerant people, for people passing through, so that they can. So whoever's field this was obeying the law.
Right.
And Jesus and the disciples were the beneficiaries. But yeah, they did it on the Sabbath. And,
so
you can't work on the Sabbath.
Right, so Jesus tells the story of David. Similar type of story. David was in trouble. He and his fellows were definitely hungry, and they stole some bread that had been made for the priests.
Yeah,
right?
I wouldn't use the word stole, and probably because David asked the priest if he could have some, even though he wasn't a priest. Right. And that was the thing. So the priest gave it to him. But Jesus' point was, and the Pharisees would have just, flipped over the fact that, David ate this, right? He wasn't king yet, whatever. Right. And Jesus was like, it's still just bread. And this was, God's servant who needed food.
Yeah, an anointed servant who needed food.
Yeah.
Could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then he ties it back to the Sabbath day and the principle of the Sabbath then.
Right. Right. Well, and his main point turns out to be, what was the Sabbath? Is the Sabbath made for man, or is man made for the Sabbath?
Yeah.
Which one is more?
Right.
And man is up here, certainly should be able to enjoy the Sabbath and the intent behind it. But if there's problems like this, some rules are okay to be broken.
Yeah, and I don't even think it was breaking the rule as much it was breaking tradition, right?
Right.
Better
said that way.
Because if Jesus broke the law,
that'd be a bigger problem.
That would be a problem, right? So Jesus never broke the law. He never told anybody to break the law. In fact, he told them to obey the law. Right. We see that with the leper here in chapter 1. Don't go telling everybody, what I did for you. I cleansed the leper. Go see the priest. Because under the law, you have to go see the priest. And until the priest says you're clean, you're still unclean. Right. So don't go running home and contaminating everybody. Do what you're supposed to do, then go home. And so Jesus did the same thing. But yes, the Sabbath was a gift from God for people, not the other way around.
Right.
So.
Right. Well, and even today, sometimes we overplay. Oh, we can't.
Yeah.
can't do too much.
Yeah.
We don't want to do, whatever.
Yeah.
On the Sabbath.
And it's funny because well, not funny, I guess, but he claimed to be the Lord, even of the Sabbath. He was the master of the Sabbath, right? I mean, he started it, right? I mean, he created it. Back in Genesis, he was. Right. Of course, they didn't acknowledge that fact, but he's like, listen, I know the purpose behind the Sabbath. Yeah. I was there,
right?
Right. So,
do you have any other ones?
Well, I just found something that was really interesting when I was reading this again. I don't know, maybe I've seen it before. I don't remember it. But one of the disciples is always called James, the son of Alphaeus, right? And it's just the way it is, because there was James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, and then there was James, the son of Alphaeus. Just, here in chapter 2, Levi, the tax collector, who's also called Matthew in Matthew and Luke, Levi, the tax collector, is called Levi, the son of Alphaeus.
Oh, I missed that.
I don't recall seeing that. So is it the same Alphaeus? Are they brothers too? You're like, well, maybe it's James, the same guy. No, because when we get over to chapter 3, James is called the son of Alphaeus, and Levi's also in the list. So, actually, Matthew's in the list over here in the next one. So, just
interesting.
I was reading it, and I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
just sort of caught my eye. So, you can read the Bible for how many ever decades and still see something new. And
I'm amazed by that.
Yeah.
I also like the superiority of the new. Also, I think, not that I understand it completely, but I think that took a long time for me to understand, because I always wanted the new and the old to be compatible with each other.
Mm-hmm.
But Jesus is saying right off the bat, the new is different.
Yeah.
And it's a different mold, and it's not going to fit in the old.
Yeah.
And he uses the wineskin as the example, and he has got a couple other examples too.
Yeah.
But you need to put new wine in a new wineskin, and he's telling everyone something new is coming.
Something new is coming. Yep.
And myself included didn't get it.
that idea that he's sort of dropping breadcrumbs. Yeah. This isn't the way it's always going to be. I know this is the way it seems like it's always been, but God is at work doing something new.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that as you read through the Gospels, not so much Mark, because it's condensed, but some of the other ones, there's just sort of this breadcrumb trail where you look back and you're like, oh, he was talking about that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so kind of cool.
Yeah, so high level, big level of running through these first couple of chapters. So much stuff crammed in here.
Yeah.
Right. And we'll just find that that's true for the rest of the book.
Yeah. So we'll probably go the same way. Pick out some key parts and focus on those versus focusing on everything that you're going to read for the week.
Yeah. Yeah. But as you're reading, maybe you see something, and of course we didn't cover, much of anything as far as in detail, but you see something maybe that you haven't seen before. Let us know, because that's really cool to us. Maybe we haven't seen it, maybe we've forgotten about it, and we help each other grow that way. Share it with your friends and family. Ask them to do the same thing with you. Hey, I didn't know this, and then you have a good chance to talk with people about it as well. We'll come back next week with the next couple of chapters, and we'll see you then.
Bye, everybody.